You overcomplicate things, don't you? Here's a question for you. Would you rather carry a light and clear life or live trapped in a tangle of problems that never needed to exist? This is an extremely debatable topic, and I want to approach it as impartially as possible. The discussion about why we turn the simple into the difficult is deeper than it seems, and before we dive into this subject, we need to understand what complicating really means. Complicating, in the psychological and philosophical sense, isn't just adding unnecessary steps. It's creating layers of worry, noise, and anxiety that distort reality. It's when the mind transforms a direct action into a mental labyrinth, when a simple choice becomes a dilemma, when a small problem grows as if it were a threat. In other words, complicating is when we stop seeing the essential and start living dominated by the superfluous. And according to Seneca, this is one of the greatest errors of the human mind. The truth is that we've been trained to believe that complicating things means being intelligent, relevant, serious. From early on, we learn that the more difficult something seems, the more value it has, that the more steps you create, the more competent you are. Think about it with me. When someone speaks simply and directly, they're often seen as shallow, basic, even naive. But when someone uses difficult words, explains something with 10 layers, makes everything seem more complicated than it really is, then yes, that person seems intelligent, deep, different. And this doesn't just happen in language, it happens in everything, in our choices, in our relationships, in the way we organize life. There are people who are afraid of appearing simple because simple has become synonymous with inferior, and so they go creating artificial complexity just to feel relevant. Making an analogy with music, it's as if we thought that a song is only good if it has 50 instruments playing at the same time, when in reality, many of the most beautiful songs ever made have 3 chords and 1 voice. But our culture doesn't value this. It values performance, spectacle, the appearance of depth. And this has generated an entire generation of people who no longer know how to do simple things without feeling like they're failing, that they're being too basic, that they should be doing more, being more, complicating more. Seneca saw this 2,000 years ago and already criticized it. He said that most people live in turmoil because they confuse agitation with importance. And look how this continues to be true. Nothing has changed, it's only gotten worse. Because now we have tools to complicate even faster. And what makes this even more dangerous is that this belief is rooted in everything. In educational systems that value long and complicated answers instead of direct and efficient ones. In the job market that confuses hours worked with real productivity. In social relations that transform simple connections into strategic games of appearances. You grow up in this environment and absorb it without questioning. You internalize that value is in doing more, in being more visible, in taking up more space, in dominating conversations with elaborate arguments, even when the truth could be said in 1 sentence. And then you spend your whole life trying to impress, trying to prove that you're not simple, that you're complex, that you're sophisticated, that you deserve attention. But what you're really doing is distancing yourself from the truth, creating layers upon layers of falseness, building a persona that requires so much effort to maintain that you forget who you are underneath all of it. And this is exhausting. This is alienating. This is a prison that you built yourself brick by brick. There's a weight you carry every day that doesn't come from any real crisis, doesn't come from any concrete problem. It comes from micro complications, from small decisions you turn into big dilemmas, from worries you multiply unnecessarily, from the mental list of things you think you need to solve, but that actually don't need to be solved. You wake up and it already starts. What am I going to wear? What am I going to eat? What am I going to answer in that message? What am I going to say in that meeting? What will people think? What should I be doing? What I didn't do yesterday and should have done. And each of these things alone seems small, but when you put them all together, when you carry this weight all day, every day, without stopping, without rest, without clarity, then you realize that the wear doesn't come from the big stuff, it comes from the constant. It's the accumulation of unnecessary decisions, of repetitive thoughts, of worries you create just because your mind can't stay quiet. You don't live a difficult life, You live a life you decided to make difficult, because at some point you learned that living like this is normal, that everyone lives like this, that if you're not worried about 1,000 things at the same time, you're doing something wrong. But you're not. The truth is, you're exhausting yourself with invented problems, with complexities that lead nowhere, with an overload you manufacture yourself. And the worst part is, you don't even notice anymore, because it's already become automatic. You don't even question anymore whether that worry makes sense, whether that decision needs to be so difficult, whether that problem really exists, or if you created it just to have something to solve. And you know what's most interesting about this dynamic? It's that you defend these micro-complications as if they were necessary, as if they were an inevitable part of adult life, as if being responsible meant carrying all of this. You even take some pride in it. You tell others about your chaotic routine, about the 1,000 things you have to do, about how you're always busy, always solving something, always dealing with something. And this becomes part of your identity. You become the person who has a lot to do, who's always at the limit, who barely has time to breathe. But stop for a second and ask yourself, how much of this is real? How much of this did you really choose? How much of this makes a difference in the end? The truth is that most of these micro-complications could be eliminated if you had the courage to look at them and say, no, this doesn't need to be here. But you don't do that. You maintain, you feed, you multiply. Because on some level, you believe that this complexity defines you, that without it you would be less, that your life would lose meaning. And this is an illusion that keeps you trapped in a cycle of exhaustion that leads nowhere. Seneca has a phrase that should be everywhere, on every screen, on every mirror, on every wall. He said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Let that sink into your head for a second, because this explains almost everything you experience. Most of your suffering doesn't come from what's happening. It comes from what you imagine might happen, from what you think people are thinking, from what you fear will go wrong, from what you project into the future without even knowing if it will exist. The human mind has an incredible capacity to create storms, to transform a breeze into a hurricane, to take a simple situation and build on top of it a catastrophic scenario that only exists inside your head. And you live reacting to these scenarios as if they were real. You make decisions based on imaginary fears. You paralyze yourself before problems that haven't even happened yet. You suffer for things that may never happen. And this is complicating. This is creating complexity where it doesn't exist. It's turning life into something much heavier than it needs to be. Nowadays, this has become anxiety. It's become the nice name we give to this madness of living in the future, of anticipating disasters, of suffering in anticipation. But Seneca already knew. He already understood that the mind, when it's not disciplined, when it's not observed, becomes the greatest source of suffering that exists. You're not suffering from reality. You're suffering from the distorted version your mind created of reality. And as long as you don't understand this, as long as you keep believing everything your head invents, you'll keep complicating. You'll keep creating layers of fear and worry that don't need to exist. And think about the energy you spend on this. The amount of time you spend revisiting conversations that are already over, rehearsing conversations that may never happen, imagining situations that probably won't exist, creating problems that don't exist so you can solve them mentally. It's as if your mind needed drama, as if it couldn't exist in peace, as if silence, simplicity, calm were threats that need to be filled with something, anything. And so you create, you invent, you multiply. And what's most interesting is that you think you're preparing yourself, that you're being careful, that you're anticipating problems so you can deal with them better when they appear. But that's not what happens. What happens is that you exhaust yourself before anything real even happens. You spend all your energy fighting ghosts. You get so tired from imaginary battles that when something real arrives, you have nothing left to give. Seneca understood this perfectly. He saw that the most tormented people weren't those who faced great tragedies, but those who lived tormented by the possibility of tragedies, those who suffered in anticipation, those who could never rest because they were always prepared for the worst. And this isn't wisdom, this isn't prudence, this is self-inflicted torture. This is you choosing to suffer ahead of time, choosing to carry a weight that may never need to be carried. There's a very big confusion that happens in almost everyone's head, and this confusion is between movement and progress. You think that the busier you are, the more things you do, the more tasks you accumulate, the more you're advancing, the more productive you're being, the closer you are to some better place. But that's not how it works. Movement isn't progress. Agitation isn't advancement. You can spend the whole day moving, answering messages, solving small things, having meetings, filling your schedule, and at the end of the day, not have advanced absolutely anything on what really matters. But you feel important, you feel necessary, you feel productive, because you were busy, because you were in motion. And this is a trap, because movement without direction is just a waste of energy. It's just a way for you to feel relevant without having to face what really needs to be faced. Seneca criticized this a lot. He said that most people are busy with nothing, that they fill life with useless tasks just to avoid having to stop and ask themselves what really matters. And this is exactly what you do when you complicate. You create artificial movement, you fill the agenda, you multiply commitments, you turn everything into urgency. Not because you need to, but because having a full life gives you the illusion that you're going somewhere. But you're not, you're just spinning in the same place, only more tired, more stressed, more lost. Because progress isn't about quantity, it's about clarity. It's about knowing where you're going and eliminating everything that diverts you from that. And most people don't have the courage to do this, because admitting that half of what you do is unnecessary is admitting that you're wasting time, that you're deceiving yourself, that you're complicating without reason. And there's another side to this that needs to be said, which is how we use this confusion to escape from what really matters. Because facing the essential is difficult, it's uncomfortable, it's scary. The essential requires you to make real decisions, to make choices that have consequences, to face what you've been avoiding for so long. But filling the day with movement, with small tasks, with manufactured urgencies, with occupations that seem important but that lead nowhere, this is easy, this is safe. This keeps you busy without putting you at risk. And then you spend weeks, months, years in constant motion, always doing something, always with the feeling that you don't have time, always with the perfect excuse not to face what needs to be faced. Because you're busy, you have things to do, you have commitments, you have responsibilities. But these things, these commitments, these responsibilities, how many of them did you really choose? How many of them make a difference in what you want to build? How many of them bring you closer to who you want to be? The truth is, you created a complicated life as a defense, as a way of not having to look at what really matters, as a way of not having to admit that you're afraid, that you're lost, that you don't know where you're going. And as long as you can keep yourself in motion, you don't have to face this. You can keep pretending that you're progressing, that you're advancing, that you're in control. There's a very deep fear regarding simplicity, and I notice this every time I suggest to someone that they simplify their life. The reaction is almost always one of discomfort, of resistance, as if simplifying meant losing something, as if it meant becoming less, as if the simple life were empty, boring, insignificant. But why are we so afraid of this? Why does the idea of living with less, choosing less, thinking less, worrying less, scare us so much? I think it's because simplicity requires you to be alone with yourself, and that's terrifying. When you remove the noise, when you take away the excess, when you cut out the distractions, what's left? What's left is you. What's left is silence. What's left is emptiness. And most people don't want to look at that, because it's easier to live in chaos. It's more comfortable to always be busy, always worried, always doing something, than to stop and confront who you really are. Simplicity is dangerous because it forces you to be honest. It doesn't let you hide behind a full routine, a packed schedule, 1,000 commitments that justify your existence. It places you in front of yourself and asks, who are you when you take all of this away? What remains when you have nothing left to do, nothing to prove, nothing to conquer? And many people don't know how to answer. And that's why they keep complicating. Keep filling life with things. Because complicating is a form of escape. It's a way of never having to look inside and face what's there. Seneca understood this. He said that the greatest challenge isn't to conquer the world, it's to conquer yourself. It's to have the courage to live without needing all this excess, without needing this external validation that comes from a full life. And there's another layer to this, which is the fear of judgment. Because we live in a culture that values more, that celebrates excess, that applauds those who are always doing, always conquering, always accumulating. And when you choose simplicity, when you choose less, you're going against this. You're saying that you don't need everything they sell you as necessary, that you don't want to participate in this race, that you prefer clarity to recognition. And this is scary because you know people will judge, that they'll find it strange, that they'll ask why you're not doing more, why you're not seeking more, why you're satisfied with so little. And you're afraid of seeming lazy, of seeming complacent, of seeming like you gave up, that you have no ambition, that you're not strong enough to handle the complexity that everyone else handles. But the truth is the opposite. Choosing simplicity requires more courage than choosing excess because excess is accepted, it's expected, it's encouraged. Simplicity is rebellion. It's you saying that the rules of the game don't make sense to you, that you're not going to exhaust yourself trying to impress people who deep down don't matter, that you're not going to sacrifice your peace to fit into a standard that leaves you empty. There's another layer to all of this that's even more subtle, and it's about how we complicate things to seem important, to justify our own existence, to show others and ourselves that we're relevant. Think about how many times you created difficulty where there wasn't any just to have a story to tell, just to be able to say that you're dealing with serious things, that you have responsibilities, that your life is complex. Because if your life is simple, if your choices are obvious, if your problems are small, what does that say about you? Are you important? Are you enough? Do you matter? The ego needs this validation. It needs to feel that you're special. And one of the easiest ways to feed this is to complicate everything, to turn each decision into a drama, each problem into a crisis, each task into a heroic challenge. And then you feel bigger than you really are. You feel necessary. You feel like the protagonist of something important. But this is a trap, because the more you depend on this complexity to feel relevant, the more you need it, the more you multiply it, the more you become hostage to it. And in the end, you no longer know who you are without all this theater, without all this fabrication of importance. Seneca was very direct about this. He said that true greatness lies in not depending on external opinion, in not needing to prove anything to anyone, in living simply, without feeling diminished by it. But we didn't learn this. We learned the opposite. We learned that value comes from outside, that importance comes from recognition, and that's why we complicate, because complication becomes a currency, a way to show that we deserve attention, respect, consideration. And look how this manifests in daily life, in conversations where you exaggerate your own problems to seem like you're dealing with more than you really are, in meetings where you complicate a simple explanation to seem more technical, more specialized, more indispensable, on social media where you post about your full routine, about how busy you are, about how many things you need to handle, not because you want to complain, but because you want to show that you're relevant, that you have a life that matters, that you're doing things that deserve attention. And we know this works. We see that people respond, that they validate, that they recognize, and so you keep doing it. You keep complicating. You keep fabricating importance where it doesn't exist. But this has a cost, and the cost is that you stop living your own life and start living for the audience. You stop doing what makes sense and start doing what seems impressive. You stop seeking what satisfies you and start seeking what validates you. And in the end, you have a full life, a complicated life, a life that seems important in the eyes of others, but that inside is empty because it's not yours. It's not real. It's not what you really want. It's just a performance you learned to do so well that you believe it yourself. Another point that needs to be said is about the culture of comparison and how it feeds this need to complicate everything. You look to the side and see someone doing more, conquering more, being more, and automatically you feel you need to do the same, that you need to be at the same level, that you need to prove you're also capable. And then you start to accumulate, you start to add things to your life that you don't even really want, but that seem necessary because everyone is doing them. You create routines that don't make sense for you. You accept commitments that drain your energy. You pursue goals that aren't yours just because you think you should, because you saw someone doing it and thought you had to do it too. And this is a perfect recipe for complicating, because you're not living your life. You're trying to live other people's lives. You're competing in a game you didn't even choose to play. Seneca said that each person has their own path, and that comparing is wasting time, losing focus, losing yourself. He understood that the only thing that matters is what makes sense for you, not what makes sense for others, not what seems impressive, not what everyone is doing. But nowadays, comparison is constant. It's everywhere, on social media, in conversations, in the way we measure success, happiness, value. And the more you compare yourself, the more you complicate, because you'll always find someone doing more, having more, being more, and you'll always feel you need to catch up, that you need to compensate, that you need to prove. And this has no end. It's a cycle that only increases complexity, that only distances you from what really matters. And what's worse is that social media has turned comparison into something inescapable, into something that happens all the time, in every scroll, in every post, in every story you see. You wake up and you're already seeing someone traveling, someone conquering, someone celebrating, someone showing a life that seems perfect, organized, full of purpose. And even knowing that it's edited, that it's just a snippet, that behind it there's a whole reality that doesn't show, you still feel the impact, you still feel like you're falling behind, that you should be doing more, that your life isn't enough. And then you react, you try to compensate, you start adding things to your routine, you start seeking achievements that can be shown, you start complicating your own life just to have something that seems worthy of being shared. And this is insane. It's you molding your reality based on distorted versions of other people's reality. It's you creating artificial complexity just to compete in a game that no one can win. Because no matter how much you do, no matter how much you conquer, there will always be someone doing more. And you'll always feel it's not enough, that you need one more step, one more achievement, one more thing to validate your existence. And while you live like this, you don't live, you just perform. You just manage an image you think you need to maintain. There's also the fact that we use complication as an emotional anesthetic. And this is one of the most dangerous things we do without realizing it. When you fill your life with tasks, commitments, worries, you don't have time to feel. You don't have space to process emotions. You don't have to face what's happening inside. And many people prefer it this way. Many people prefer to live busy, stressed, overloaded, than to stop and feel the emptiness, the loneliness, the sadness, the frustration, the fear. Because feeling hurts. Feeling is vulnerable. Feeling places you in front of things you don't know how to deal with. But complicating is easy. Complicating is safe. Complicating gives you something to focus on that isn't yourself. It's as if you were running all the time so you don't have to stop and look inside, so you don't have to admit that something's wrong, that something needs to be faced. And this works for a while. It works as long as you can keep yourself busy, but eventually it crumbles. Eventually exhaustion hits, and then everything you were avoiding comes all at once, only multiplied, only heavier. Seneca talked a lot about self-awareness and inner discipline. He understood that running from yourself is the worst thing you can do, that the only way to have peace is to look inside, to process what needs to be processed, to face what needs to be faced. But we don't do this. We distract, we complicate, we fill life with things so we don't have to deal with what really matters. And this isn't living, this is just surviving with a blindfold on. And there's something very specific that happens when you use complication this way, which is you create a narrative where you're the victim of circumstances, where you're just someone who's trying to handle everything, who's overloaded not by choice, but by necessity. And this removes you from responsibility. This allows you to look at your own life and say, I have no choice. I need to do all of this. I can't stop. I can't simplify. I can't slow down. But this is a lie. This is a lie you tell yourself, so you don't have to admit that you're running, that you're hiding, that you're using complexity as a shield against vulnerability. Because if you admit you have a choice, if you admit you could live differently, then you need to face why you're not doing it. You need to look at what scares you so much about simplicity, about silence, about peace. And this is much harder than continuing to run. It's much harder than continuing to hide behind a chaotic life that justifies why you don't have time to feel, to process, to truly know yourself. Seneca said that self-knowledge is the starting point for everything, that without it, you're just reacting, just surviving, just being carried by the current. But we're afraid of this. We're afraid to stop and ask ourselves, who am I when I take all of this away? What am I avoiding? What am I afraid of? And as long as you don't ask these questions, as long as you keep using complication as an anesthetic, you'll remain trapped, you'll remain exhausted, you'll keep living a life that isn't yours. The trap of more is better is one of the most destructive beliefs of our time, and almost everyone falls into it without questioning. More money, more achievements, more experiences, more objects, more recognition, more followers, more. And you believe that the more you have, the more complete you become, the happier you'll be, the more fulfilled you'll feel. But that's not what happens. What happens is that the more you accumulate, the more complicated your life becomes, the more things you have to manage, the more decisions you have to make, the more weight you carry. And what's worse is that this more never satisfies, because there's always one more step. There's always one more thing you think you need. There's always one more goal you put in front. And you never arrive. You never feel it's enough. You never stop and say it's good. I have what I need. Because the logic of more is insatiable. It feeds on itself. It grows the more you feed it. Seneca lived in one of the richest times in Rome and still defended minimalism. Defended the idea that less is more. That true wealth isn't in having, but in not needing to have. He saw that the richest people were often the most miserable because they were trapped in a cycle of accumulation that never ended, that never brought peace. And today it's no different. You look around and see people with everything and with nothing at the same time. People who have more than they need, but who don't have clarity, who don't have tranquility, who don't have time, who don't have silence. Because accumulating complicates. Because the more you have, the more you need to take care of, the more you need to protect, the more you need to justify. And in the end, you have nothing. You're just a guardian of things that don't make you happy. And this logic of more doesn't just apply to material things. It applies to everything. To experiences, to relationships, to achievements, to knowledge. You think that the more places you visit, the more complete you'll be, that the more courses you take, the more prepared you'll be, that the more people you meet, the more connected you'll feel. But it doesn't work like that, because quantity isn't quality, and accumulating experiences without processing, without absorbing, without really living, is as empty as accumulating objects. You can travel to 50 countries and not have really known any of them. You can take 20 courses and not have learned anything that transforms you. You can have 1,000 contacts on social media and not have a single real relationship. Because more distracts you from the essential. It makes you believe that the solution is always in adding, never in deepening, never in committing, never in choosing. And so you live on the surface of everything, always passing through, never staying, always seeking the next thing, never enjoying the now. Seneca understood that depth is more valuable than breadth, that it's better to know a few things well than to know many things superficially, that it's better to have a few true relationships than many empty connections. But we're taught the opposite. We're taught that variety is wealth, that options are freedom, that accumulating is progress. And so we complicate, we multiply, we get lost in a sea of options that in the end only leaves us more confused, more tired, more empty. It also needs to be said that there's a whole system that profits from your complicated life. And this isn't conspiracy theory. This is market strategy. The more confused you are, the more overloaded you live, the more lost you feel, the more you consume, the more you depend, the more you need external solutions. Because you don't have time to cook, so you order food. You don't have energy to think, so you consume ready-made content. You don't have clarity about what you want, so you buy what they tell you you should want. And the more complicated your life is, the more you feed this cycle, the more you become dependent on products, services, distractions that promise to make things easier, but that deep down only complicate more, only trap you more. The economy of distraction needs you to be busy, stressed, overloaded, because it's in this state that you're most vulnerable. It's in this state that you buy without thinking, that you accept without questioning, that you settle for superficial solutions that solve nothing. And this is very convenient for those who sell, but it's destructive for those who live. Seneca understood that autonomy is freedom, that depending less is living more, that simplicity is power. And recovering this today means getting out of this system, means stopping feeding your own complication, means choosing clarity instead of chaos. But this requires courage, because it means going against the current. It means being different. It means accepting that you won't have everything they sell you as necessary. And there's a deeper layer to this, which is how this system doesn't just sell products, but sells complication itself as a lifestyle, as an identity, as something desirable. You see ads for apps that promise to organize your chaotic life, but that actually only add another layer of complexity, another thing for you to manage, another subscription for you to pay. You see gurus selling courses about productivity, about optimization, about how to do more in less time, as if the problem were you not doing enough, when the real problem is that you're doing too much. You're overloading yourself. You're complicating where you don't need to. And all of this feeds the narrative that you need more, that you're not enough as you are, that you need tools, techniques, methods, systems, when in reality, what you need is less. It's clarity, it's simplicity. But selling simplicity isn't profitable. Teaching you to live with less doesn't generate revenue. Showing that you already have what you need doesn't create dependency. So the system keeps selling more, keeps complicating, keeps convincing you that the solution to your chaos is in adding one more thing, one more app, one more course, one more product. And you buy, you try, you add another layer, and your life gets more complicated, and then you need something more to deal with this new complication, and the cycle continues. Seneca would say, this is madness, that this is you running after your own tail, that this is losing your life trying to organize it. Seneca has a wisdom about the essential that should be taught from an early age, but that almost no one learns. He said that before seeking more, before conquering, before accumulating, you need to remove the excess. You need to clean. You need to eliminate what doesn't serve. Because clarity doesn't come from adding. Clarity comes from subtracting. You don't become freer by accumulating options. You become freer by eliminating what distracts you. You don't become stronger by doing more. You become stronger by focusing on what really matters. And this is the opposite of what we learn. We learn that to improve you need to add, that to grow you need to do more, that to win you need to multiply. But Seneca understood that true strength lies in being able to say no, in being able to cut, in being able to live with less and not feel incomplete. And this is revolutionary, because modern life is saturated, it's excessive, it's full of noise, and we think the solution is more filtering, more organization, more strategy. But it's not. The solution is less. It's removing. It's simplifying. And when you do this, when you really clean your life of what doesn't need to be there, what's left is clarity, it's lightness, it's space to breathe. But getting to this point requires you to face the discomfort of letting go, of releasing, of accepting that less can be more than enough. There's a confusion that needs to be undone, and it's about the difference between a simple life and a small life. Many people think that simplifying is limiting, that it's giving up, that it's settling for less than you could have. But it's not that, A simple life isn't a small life. A simple life is a conscious life. It's a life where you choose what really matters and eliminate the rest. It's a life where you don't carry unnecessary weight, where you don't tie yourself to things that don't make a difference, where you live with clarity instead of chaos. And this isn't limitation, this is freedom. Because the simpler you live, the lighter you become, the freer you are, the more present you can be. On the other hand, a complicated life, a life full of excesses, of commitments you didn't choose, of worries you fabricated, that is a small life, because you don't have space for anything that really matters. You're trapped in a machine that doesn't stop. You're hostage to a complexity that consumes you. And in the end, you don't live. You just manage. You just put out fires. You just try to handle it. Seneca defended that the simple life is the life of the wise. It's the life of someone who understood that value isn't in quantity, but in quality. It isn't in accumulating, but in choosing. And this is liberating because it means you don't need as much as you think. It means you can live well with less. It means that happiness, peace, fulfillment aren't on the other side of an infinite list of achievements. They're here now, when you stop complicating and start living. And there's an interesting paradox in this, which is how the simple life actually gives you more, not less. When you remove the excess, when you cut what doesn't serve, when you simplify, what happens is that you create space, you create time, you create energy to focus on what really makes a difference. You don't have less, you have better. You don't live less, you live more deeply. Because complication is superficial, it forces you to go through everything without really experiencing anything. It keeps you busy without letting you be present. It gives you 1,000 options but robs you of the ability to choose with clarity. Simplicity, on the other hand, allows you to dive in, allows you to be here, allows you to feel, think, truly live. And this is what most people seek without knowing it. They seek depth, meaning, connection, but they look in the wrong places, in accumulation, in complexity, in trying to have more. But these things aren't there. They're in simplicity, in the essential, in what remains when you take away everything that doesn't matter. Seneca knew this. He lived this. He defended that true wealth lies in not needing, in not depending, in being free to live without carrying the weight of the unnecessary. And this is a lesson we urgently need to relearn, because we're drowning in excess, getting lost in complication, exhausting ourselves in a race that leads nowhere. How do you identify the complications you create yourself? Because the problem is that most of them are invisible, they're automatic, they're so natural that you don't even notice you're doing it. But there are some patterns that repeat, and when you start paying attention to them, you start to see how much you complicate unnecessarily. First, observe the worries you carry. How many of them are real, and how many are projections? How many are about things that already happened and that you can't change? How many are about things that may never happen? Second, observe the justifications you give for your choices. How many times do you complicate a simple decision by creating arguments for all sides, creating scenarios, creating dilemmas that don't exist? Third, observe the tasks you do. How many of them really need to be done? And how many are just ways for you to feel busy, to feel productive, to avoid what really matters? Seneca defended constant examination of life. He said, you need to look at yourself with honesty. You need to question your habits, your choices, your beliefs. Because it's very easy to live on autopilot. It's very easy to repeat patterns without even knowing why. And when you do this, when you really look at what you're doing and ask yourself why you're doing it, you realize that half of your life is unnecessary, that half of your problems are fabricated, that half of your weight is illusion. And this isn't easy to accept, because it means admitting you have more control than you thought, that you could be living differently, that you chose to complicate. But it's also liberating, because it means you can choose to simplify, you can choose to cut, you can choose to stop creating obstacles that don't need to exist. The Stoic practice of conscious reduction is something that should be taught as an essential skill, but almost no one knows how to do it. And it's not about aesthetic minimalism. It's not about having an empty house or an Instagram routine. It's about training the mind to eliminate what doesn't serve, to cut excesses deliberately and constantly. Seneca did this every day. He looked at his own life and asked himself what could be removed, what was left over, what was getting in the way. And this applies to everything, to thoughts, to commitments, to objects, to relationships, to worries. Reducing inputs, for example, is one of the most powerful things you can do, because most people live bombarded with information, with news, with opinions, with content, and this creates a permanent mental confusion that prevents you from thinking clearly. Reducing commitments is another. You don't need to be in everything. You don't need to say yes to everything. You don't need to fill every empty space in your schedule. Reducing possessions too, because the more you have, the more you carry, the more you worry, the more time you waste managing things that don't make a difference. And reducing thoughts, which is perhaps the most difficult, because the mind loves to create, loves to multiply, loves to complicate. But you can train this. You can notice when you're entering a loop, when you're creating a storm, when you're complicating without reason. And you can stop, you can breathe, you can choose not to follow that thought. And this isn't repression, this is discipline. This is you taking control of your own mind instead of being controlled by it. Simplicity isn't something that happens on its own. It's something you train, it's something you practice, it's something that requires conscious effort until it becomes natural. There's a specific courage that almost no one has, and it's the courage to choose the obvious. How many times did you know exactly what you needed to do, but instead of doing it, you complicated, you created doubts, you sought more information, you asked for more opinions, you invented obstacles, you postponed, you justified, and all of this because choosing the obvious seems too easy, seems too simple, seems like anyone could do it, and you want to be special. You want to prove that you thought more, that you considered more, that you're more complex than that. But many times the right answer is the first one that appears. It's the most direct, it's the most obvious. And ignoring this out of fear of judgment, out of fear of seeming simple, out of fear of not impressing anyone, is complicating out of vanity, is wasting time because of ego. Seneca said that the wise person acts aligned with the essential, not with the ego, that they don't need to prove anything, don't need to impress, don't need to do more than necessary. They do what needs to be done in the most direct way possible and move on. And this is a strength that most don't have, because most are trapped in the need for validation, in the need to seem like more, to be recognized as different, as special, as superior. But the truth is that choosing the obvious when the obvious is the right answer is one of the purest forms of wisdom. It's one of the most honest ways to live. And when you stop complicating simple decisions, when you stop creating unnecessary layers just to seem smarter, you realize that life flows, that things happen, that you move forward without needing all this theater. And when you finally stop complicating, when you really choose simplicity, when you cut the excesses, when you remove what doesn't serve, when you stop fabricating obstacles, something changes. It's not a dramatic change, it's not an instant transformation, but it's a clarity that emerges. It's a lightness you start to feel. It's a focus that didn't exist before. You realize you have more time, but not because the day got bigger, because you stopped wasting energy on things that don't matter. You realize you have more peace, but not because the problems disappeared, because you stopped multiplying them. You realize you can think better, decide better, live better, not because you got smarter, but because you removed the noise that was preventing you from thinking clearly. And this is liberating, because you finally understand that most of the weight you were carrying wasn't from life, it was from the way you chose to live. Seneca said that life is long enough for those who know how to use it, but that most people waste it on worries, on excesses, on complications that lead nowhere. And he was right, life isn't short, life is poorly used, and when you stop complicating, when you choose simplicity, when you focus on the essential, you realize there is time, there is space, there is possibility. But this requires you to let go of what doesn't serve, that you have the courage to say no, that you accept that less can be more than you ever imagined. And perhaps this is the greatest lesson Seneca left, that simplicity isn't renunciation, it's not loss, it's not limitation. Simplicity is strength, it's clarity, it's freedom. It's you recovering control of your own life and living according to what really matters, not according to what everyone says should matter. If you made it this far, leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. And tell me in the comments, in which area of your life do you complicate the most unnecessarily? I want to read what you have to say about this. Until the next video.